How about it for the former ambassador? This is very. We should have had some all hail kind of music, Albert. I fault you for this. But Francis Rooney's had a distinguished life around politics and around an ambassadorship, and he joins us now with some thoughts on everything from current politics to what's going on internationally. How about it for Ambassador Francis Rooney, everyone? Hello, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let me ask you, first of all, about the current climate in America politically. I mean, we are living through an extraordinary time, I'm sure you would agree. And how does the kind of politics that you grew up with, I mean, which is I would suggest had perhaps, and you may disagree with this, but I'd suggest had a kind of basic civility to it. You know, there was sort of a reversion to the mean when it came to the political discourse. How do you square that with what we've evolved to, and can we get back to that which I've just described?
Well, I'm going to be optimistic that we can. If you go back to the early 19th century and very late 18th century, the foundations of our country, there was an equal amount of partisan rancor, but they managed to figure it out and move forward. You know, Thomas Jefferson was an anti-war pacifist candidate, got elected, realized what the Barbary pirates were doing and said, let's go get them. So we need a little more of that kind of leadership that we used to have to bridge partisan gaps. And we don't seem to have it right now. But
we don't seem. Yeah, we don't. If I were to concede that it's top down, we don't seem to have it. Then on either side, I mean, there is it's your party, which you I imagine you're still a registered Republican. Are you downcast at all by what's happened to that party, or do you really feel it's in response to these crazy Democrats type of thing?
Well, it's two things. I mean, the polarity in the partisanship that has arisen in the last 20 years has driven a lot of people to extreme sides, right and left. And that makes it very difficult to find constructive solutions to difficult problems like immigration, China, et cetera, et cetera. The bigger the problem, the less chance that our government can solve it. All they can do is throw money at it. And that's not a good answer for American people.
But I'll just give you an example, Ambassador. This Tommy Tuberville stuff, where he's holding up these, essentially he's blocked all of these confirmations and these promotions in the Pentagon because of I kind of own the lib moments that he's carved out for himself on the question of women's reproductive rights. You can't possibly be okay with that, are you?
No, I think it's ridiculous. You're talking about apples and oranges. We're talking about funding the military and appointing leaders to the military. That has nothing to do with social issues. And he's conflating two things that shouldn't be conflated.
What's the cure for that kind of problem? It's a real poison in our politics today.
Well, I think the cure there is that people need to bring pressure on Tuberville in Alabama to say, we need a Marine Commandante. We need a Marine commandant, and this is a good guy. Go confirm him.
So that pressure that you're talking about, that has to come from, and I don't mean to, and please don't misunderstand when I say your party. I'm just speaking of, I think there's some ownership problems I've noticed with a lot of my friends who are GOP. Like they don't want to wrap their hands around this. And admittedly, Democrats and Republicans are made up of all of these different characters, some of whom are more extreme than others. But in this case, that pressure that you speak of, does it exist? Is there a primordial ooze of pressure from your side of politics to rein in this Tuberville?
One of the great things about the democracy that our forefathers set up is that it's grassroots. And yeah, senators can beat on Tuberville. People can write in about Tuberville. But when it comes right down to it, Alabamians need to say, Tuberville, stow it, or we're done with you.
You were in the House representing Florida, right?
Mhm.
District in Florida.
Yeah.
I'm curious now, that was in '05 to '08.
No, I was the ambassador in the
Oh,
Vatican. I was
that
a
was in your ambassador. I'm
congressman
sorry.
from 17 to 21.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. So you must have then noticed in 17 to 21 already this craziness that's going on in the House. There's now the House admittedly is a much bigger body. You can give us a snapshot of it. So the net is cast so wide that maybe there's more crazy getting through, and they're gerrymandered district and all the rest. But Ambassador, speak to what's going on in the House and some of the aspects to the legislative process that I think just aren't reflected in today's politics in the House.
Yeah, in the 70s, over 80% of House districts were decided in the general election by a very close margin. Now it's very few. They're all decided in the primaries, and that's what's driven everybody to the right and the left. There's no middle ground. There is some middle ground, but it's not very many people, and it's really not the way the system's designed to work. The election should be at the general, not the primary, and people should have a contest of ideas. And you'll find more of each party elected that way, and they can figure out common ground. Like Ronald Reagan said, the 80% solution.
Yeah, there is something to what you say when you talk about leadership, because I do think of a charismatic figure like Ronald Reagan, and I mean, I think you and I would probably disagree on the politics of Ronald Reagan, but I certainly would not disagree about the charisma of Ronald Reagan and his ability to sort of marshal people toward his ideas and his policies. There isn't a charismatic figure like that in today's American politics. Trump is certainly has the charisma of the entire field wrapped up in his ability to communicate, but it's what he's communicating that's a bit scary. We do lack a charismatic figure like a Ronald Reagan.
Well, we lack a charismatic figure that is broadly based, that's not tactically focused on their narrow slice of their support, like Biden or like Trump. We lack someone that's broader than that can reach out and find consensus in America. We don't have that right now.
I see our elections, and I'm wondering if you agree, though, and the reason I mentioned charisma was in part because you mentioned leadership, but also because, in a way, these elections, particularly top-of-ticket elections, but you can tell me what it's like to actually run for the House, I see them as kind of a high school elections. I mean, where, these smack talkers and the guy who can own the moment, I mean, guy generically, man or woman, who can own the moment, own the libs the best increasingly because of the divided politics. These are the people who float to the surface. That has to frustrate you, doesn't it?
Well, it does. At the end of the Clinton administration, like a quarter of congressional districts were considered highly partisan. Now it's like 80%. The whole thing has become so polarized and driven to the primaries that we really don't have any kind of way to bring people together. The primaries elect the people, so that drives them to the left or right and further widens the gap down the middle, which is what you've got to have to solve problems. You've got to have some kind of compromise in the middle.
And I think that's so well said and said succinctly, so thank you. On the House side, now under GOP control, it also has to frustrate you that there is sort of a priority about, again, owning the libs or owning Biden, the Hunter Biden thing, the drumbeat of wanting to impeach the president. I'm just wondering, what's the cure to that? I mean, and I presume you wouldn't sign on to any of that.
Well, I think the business about impeaching the president's ridiculous. Okay. Now, I do think Hunter Biden is a crook. And
yeah, I don't think you get any disagreement from us here.
His father is a good father, and he may have crossed a few lines. The child's had a lot of problems in his life. Can understand that as a father. But the guy's a crook, and we should call him out. He should be held accountable for what he did.
And I don't think you get any disagreement here. I guess what I'm asking about when I talk about your frustration is to have House hearings dedicated to this when there doesn't appear to be linkage. I mean, I would agree with you. For example, I've said on this show, I don't like the fact that Biden, the president, was even on a call to allow his son to imply that there was a relationship. I don't think there was, and I don't think Joe Biden wanted no part of that. He wanted to be a loving father, but I don't even like that he was on the call. All right, so I've made that point passionately. But you have to be frustrated as a GOPer to see the House in any way hijacked by this demand to have Hunter Biden investigations and the business of Congress being hijacked that way.
Well, it would be a lot better if the Justice Department would do its job. If the Justice Department would do its job, prosecute Hunter Biden like they'd prosecute anybody else, then the Congress could go about their business of solving the bigger problems that face the American people.
You don't feel that that leaving a prosecutor in place and dedicating him somebody who was a Trump-appointed prosecutor, that wasn't sufficient for you in terms of the Justice Department?
I mean, I've read a couple of things where they've made some moves that weren't really great, like tipping off the people about his laptop and stuff before they could come check it out. I mean, it's like, oh, I'm going to come rob your store at 4:00. Get ready, that kind of thing. And
well, there's a lot of that, and we saw it with the former president, right? I mean, we need those documents back. We need them back. We're coming. No, we need them. All right. If you don't give them to us, we have to. No, we know there are more documents we're coming to get. So I think there's a lot at that level. Wouldn't you concede? Yeah.
But I think Hunter Biden's had a lot of problems in his life. He's a defective guy, and he traded on his dad's influence. And they might as well just admit what he did and move on. Try him for what he did. He was clearly bought off by the Ukrainians. I mean, to make $600-something thousand a year as a director with no oil and gas experience, doesn't.
Oh, of course, absolutely. I wouldn't disagree with you for an instant about that. And so then I look to Jared Kushner and what happened under the Trump administration. These are people who actually served in the administration who would appear to have had a less than holy way of going about their relationships, particularly in the Middle East. Do you support investigations into that?
Well, I think that what Kushner did was not good. Okay. I mean, the guy, first of all, he said, he said, I read 21 books on Middle East and I became a foreign policy expert and started this ridiculous Abraham's Accord stuff. And it was totally distractive from 50 years or 70 years of U.S.-Israel policy. Made no sense. I think his sucking up to Saudi Arabia could well have ties to his financial survival. I don't know.
When the moment came that the people around the last President Trump, I'm talking about Kushner, his sons, the president's sons, even his daughter, couldn't get security clearance, but wanted to see these wanted access to those things that are behind that security clearance. And the president came in and bigfooted and kind of made it clear, I want them all to have clearance, and they did. Did that bother you? Again, these are the systems of Washington, and you're a part of that, having seen it. Did it bother you to see them kind of subverted that way?
Yeah, there are a lot of things in the Trump White House that bothered me. And you could probably get General Kelly on here, or General McMaster's would say the same thing. I mean, they ran that office like it was a family office. And it's not a family office. It's the Oval Office, the Office of the President of the United States. It needs to be transparent, it needs to be formal, it needs to have a record of who goes in and out of there. And it was kind of like a revolving circus of Trump family. And that's a problem.
What should happen in Ukraine, Ambassador? It seems as though it's such an intractable situation, and we're clearly running a proxy war there. What's your take on Ukraine? What would you have done, and what should we do?
Well, we're back in the Cold War, when we were fighting proxy wars around the world versus Russia. Now we're fighting proxy wars around the world versus China and Russia. It's a little more complicated, but the Ukraine is a way to show that China that we will not let them take Taiwan, that we will be there. It's a way to show Japan that we will be there for them. I don't think we can let Russia just roll over the Ukraine as long as the Ukraine can fight, and they seem to be able to do it.
So you have thus far no issues with the kind of support, the military arms, et cetera, that was that has been shipped off and that was promised them?
I don't. The conundrum here is what's the way out? And is it ever going to be reasonable to cut a deal with Russia, let them keep Crimea or part of Crimea and move on? I don't know. The best would be if Zelensky could mount some kind of huge, overwhelming force and drive them out. I don't think that's going to happen, at least as far as he might drive them out of the Donbass and the eastern side of the Ukraine. But I don't think it's going to happen in Crimea.
Are you frustrated with our own military, the American military?
I'm not frustrated with our soldiers and our leaders. I'm a little frustrated with the budget. I think there's a lot of things in the budget that don't relate to military preparedness. And AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, did a study of that. And out of $800 billion, they said $160 billion of that budget does not directly relate to military preparedness. There's a lot of things in there that a different country might not have. China, for example, wouldn't have it. They seem to be able to build more ships with 1/3 of the money than we can. We still have all these soldiers in Ramstein base, Air Force Base in Germany that have been there since the end of World War II. And the fight's in Poland. Let's get those guys out where the fight is. And NATO. Why is NATO in Brussels? How about putting those NATO guys out there where the fight is so they can feel the heat and see what's going on?
I mean, it's a post-World War II arrangement that was struck, even as it's evolved since then. If I'm very frustrated with our military budget, period. I think I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I know that much of that money never leaves the Beltway. It's a scam, man. It's a scam. And I have to think that you, having been in the belly of the beast in the House, you have to have walked away. And I think you sort of hinted at it, maybe not as strongly, but you have to walk away thinking, wow, this is just, it's not cool. It's a waste of taxpayer money, money that we don't have.
Well, it is. I mean, like I say, the Washington Post said there's 20% of the $800 billion that doesn't relate to military preparedness. There's all these government consultants that advise the government on what to do, what they already know what to do, but they don't want to have their footprints on it. So they pay our taxpayer dollars to get someone else to say it for them. We have all these bases in places that shouldn't be. I think the last straw for me was after Hurricane Michael, when they decided to rebuild Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City. That is a sorry base. It's very narrow. You can't land anything on there. There wasn't anything on there but a bunch of old Saberliner 40s there. And why rebuild it? Just take the insurance money and be happy and move to somewhere where it's more strategic.
And go ahead. Why was it rebuilt in your judgment?
Politics.
Right.
Nobody wants to ever say no.
And that is, we have a death grip on this, don't we, Ambassador? This shoveling more money, more than is even asked by the Pentagon. We have a death grip on this process because neither party wants to be seen weak on defense.
Yeah, but we also have a death grip on how well we spend it. I mean,
Sure.
Like I say, if China can build a bunch of ships for 1/3 of what we spend, and we can't build any ships, what's the problem?
These weapon systems that are, you need to be Stephen Hawking to, land these jets sometimes. And the price tags on them, and sometimes they don't work, even if you are Stephen Hawking knowledge. I think a lot of it's kind of tied up in that, and that's its own scam.
Yeah.
So if you had to build an agenda for the next year in America, what would that look like?
Well, you'd have to get by some political challenges. I would refocus the military on areas where we needed our bases and needed our forces and close out the places where we don't. And that would be painful. It would cause a lot of harm in Germany, a lot of cities in the United States, but we have a political military and not a fighting force, and we need a fighting force. I would somehow or another figure out a way to solve for immigration. On the one hand, we need a border. The basic principle of geometry is you are not a geometric entity if you don't have a border. But on the other hand, we need workers. We have people that want to come here, and we should figure out a way, as President Bush tried to do in 2007, to let them come in under a work permit program where we register them, we know who they are, and we can put them to work. So everybody wins. We get workers, our economy grows, but we have a border and we don't have people that we don't know about coming in here.
The immigration situation in America has been used essentially as a political cudgel, and so you have neither party with, although Obama had a comprehensive, it was a bipartisan immigration policy and bill. That legislation was kicked out, as I recall. It was ultimately, I think Lindsey Graham even signed on to it, but in the end, nothing happened. I mean, again, it's more valuable perhaps to have an immigration problem than it is to solve an immigration problem.
That's very well said, and that's very unfortunate. The Obama Boehner effort was the George Bush effort resurrected 8 or 9 years later, and it would have enabled to have people come in here and work on work permits. It would have strengthened the border, and it was the right-wing Freedom Caucus that killed it.
Unbelievable.
In fact, it killed John Boehner's speakership.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. Boehner went down after that. Listen, Ambassador, this was great. Appreciated your input, and I know we don't come at things always exactly the same way, but as it turns out, and I think this is so true, we do come at things the same way in more ways than people probably would think, with just the the Republican-Democrat kind of a partisanship that has informed so much of the conversation in America. I really appreciate spending some time with you. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for having me on. And the beauty of our democracy, in principle, is it can accommodate reasonable debate in figuring out the best solution for all parties.
Hear, hear. Bravo. Francis Rooney, former ambassador, thank you so much, sir. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.